Bernie Sanders has just released a sweeping platform to reform America's criminal justice system. We're going to talk about why that matters in this video. Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by again. Look, Bernie Sanders has been for a long time a champion of justice broadly defined. And in 2016, one of the criticisms against him, and I don't think this was a fair one, but one of the criticisms against him was that he didn't talk enough about, issues of criminal justice and reforming the system. And now those ideas were there, but they perhaps were not as highlighted as they could have been. And so this time around, Bernie is leaving no stone unturned, and he is offering a totally comprehensive approach to making America's justice system actually a system of justice. And I could spend literally a couple hours going through each point laboriously about why this is a good thing, how it's going to help people, and on and on and on. But what I feel is most helpful is to focus on four key elements right now about how this system will transform not just America's approach to prisons and justice, but American society broadly defined. And those four issues are: one, a challenge to racial injustice within the criminal justice system; two, challenging the economic inequalities within the justice system; three, challenging this drive to dehumanize people within that system; and four, challenging the profit motives inherent to that system. And all four of those things are essential. Often people will say, it's race or class that matters in the justice system. And I think Bernie Sanders is saying that, look, if you bring an analysis that predominantly, yes, African Americans and other minority groups are often affected disproportionately by the system, but it also happens to be the case that many people affected are low income, often low income and racialized. And so you need a holistic approach. So on the terms of economics, Bernie is very clear. The system is currently designed to benefit the wealthy and punish the poor. If you can't access good public defenders, you're at a fundamental disadvantage. Or you're forced to take a plea deal because you cannot afford to pay for cash bail, or you can't afford a quality attorney that gives you confidence that you can actually win a case that you're innocent in. You will take the crime. And all of these things tend to compound the fact that for low-income people of any race, but specifically of racialized backgrounds, you do not have justice within the American Republic. And so it creates this really interesting dichotomy where apparently justice is blind, but justice can certainly see the color green, or can see the lack of the color green. So Bernie Sanders is saying, look, we're going to end cash bail, we're going to massively invest in public attorneys, and we're not only going to have more of them, but we're going to better equip them with resources and good wages, so we get good public attorneys, and we give the public attorneys the resources they need. All of these things are essential, because without this, there is no justice for the working class or poor person who finds themselves accused of a crime. Whether they did it or not, there will be no justice for them if they lack the economic means to defend themselves. And of course, connected to this is the idea of race. And within Bernie Sanders' plan, he is very careful to note that class matters, but even within each economic strata, being a person of color makes you more likely to be targeted by law enforcement. Even in the school system, bad behavior, quote unquote, by black students is more likely to be criminalized than bad behavior by white students. And young students of color are more likely to be seen as seriously delinquent than white students. And this creates a sort of school to prison pipeline. And Bernie Sanders has noted that this is due in many ways to systematic racism within education systems, within policing systems, within the court systems, and also within the prisons themselves. So every step of the way, systems of racism and underrepresentation of the populations that are affected predominantly by this, like African Americans, create this feedback loop, this ugly feedback loop. So Bernie Sanders wants to basically see the communities that have been affected by this injustice be better represented within all aspects of the legal system, within the schooling system all the way to the prisons. And he noted this in his talk with Cardi B, that one of the major challenges, not the only one, but one of the major ones, was that African Americans were underrepresented in law enforcement, and they didn't see themselves within law enforcement, which creates systems of distrust on their side, but it also creates a system of policing where the police don't have an understanding and an empathy for those they are policing. And so, addressing the realities of the school to prison pipeline, which is certainly economic, but is undeniably racial, is fundamental. Going beyond this, however, we have to look at the aspect of prison justice within the United States. And this is rooted in race and this is rooted in class, but the fundamental reality is that for a long time America's system has been based on this idea that criminals are in a sense subhuman or should be treated as such. They shouldn't be given basic human rights and dignities. It's not enough that their freedom to be out of prison is taken away. It's that they should have a horrible existence, that they should lose their right to vote, that they should lose, in large parts, access to their families, that they should lose the freedom to earn a living wage while in prison, that in some cases they should be forced to work for free or essentially for slave wages. And Bernie Sanders wants to do away with all that. He says that if you want to actually rehabilitate people and you want to create this notion that we are a compassionate and just society, prison should not exist for the retributional fantasies of the citizenry, and rather should exist to actually reform people and build, reform citizens going forward. So Bernie notes that if you treat people with respect and human dignity in prison, you're more likely to have justice going forward. You can look at nations like Scandinavia, where their prisons are less about punishment and more about reformation, and prisoners in those countries are far less likely to recommit crimes. They're much easier to reintegrate into society, and on and on and on. So Bernie says, look, we're going to let people talk to their families more. We're not going to let them be price gouged by the prison, stores. We're going to not charge them for their phone calls. We're not going to charge them for these basic human dignities. Vital here is recognizing that you should not lose basic human rights when you are in prison. Of course, one of the aspects of prison is that you lose your freedom of movement. I don't think we can avoid that. But you should not lose your right to vote. Bernie Sanders has said that. It's not just about giving the right to vote back to felons who are out of prison. That's important. But more than that, every American citizen should be able to vote. Every American above 18. It doesn't matter how heinous their crime is. Bernie might get heat for that, but he's right. He's fundamentally right. Here in Canada, every person can vote, no matter how heinous the criminal. They never lose that right, nor should they lose that right. And Bernie ties this in also to the aspect of what he calls prison gerrymandering, which is, the process by which, prisoners don't get the right to vote, but their census count basically gives weight to the people where they are in jail, which creates these really weird dynamics where in effect they have no rights, but people essentially get democratic weight on their behalf. Bernie suggests that you give them the right to vote and their votes count back from where the communities they came from, giving them a sense that they are voting for their representatives in their hometowns, in their home communities, because ultimately, for most of these prisoners, they will be aiming to go back to their communities and reintegrate themselves. And if you give them the democratic voice that they should have never lost, then you give a greater chance of that happening. And I think finally, and this ties into everything here, it ties into all of this, is that Bernie Sanders wants to decouple the justice system from the system of profit. Bernie Sanders, in a lot of ways, is a radical presidential candidate because he's a rare American politician that questions the value of profit. Not universally, but when it comes to key and essential services, Bernie Sanders is rare among even Democrats saying, why do we need to have a profit motive here? Why is profit motive driving this service? Whether it's healthcare or education or life insurance or the prison justice system. Why are profit motives so central here? And so Bernie Sanders wants to ban for-profit prisons. He wants to cut out these company middlemen that make money off the bail process. He wants to challenge all of these forms of profit making, which at their core have an incentive to keep the prisons overcrowded and to keep them, of low quality and to keep them churning people in, because that's how people make money. For-profit prisons make money when the prison population is high and when you're allowed to treat prisoners poorly, when you can keep their food quality low and you can limit their health care and you can limit contact to their families and you can make them work for less than the minimum wage. People are profiting at every step of the way on this process. Private companies. And they lobby against criminal justice reform because it's not in their interest. If you want to make the bail process fairer to lower income people, sounds like a no-brainer, does it not? But not if you're a company that makes money off the outsourced administration of bail processes. Bernie Sanders wants to break all of that down, much like the health insurance system, where he wants to say, look, we need to build a universal single-payer system that's going to be more efficient and more just and more comprehensive. He wants to do the same for the criminal justice system and cut out these parasitic middlemen wherever they exist. So I could go on and on and on about this. I really could. But there's no need. Bernie Sanders has this on his website. Point by point, you can go read that. What matters here is that the broad approaches are based on this pursuit, this endeavor towards justice. He wants to challenge the racial and class injustice of the prison system. And Bernie Sanders wants to challenge the inherent human indignities of the prison system. And above all, linking all of this is the profit motive that justifies and reinforces the indignities and the racial and class injustice. Bernie Sanders wants to fundamentally transform the justice system because without doing this, you're not going to solve so many economic and social and political cultural issues that plague American communities of color especially, but American communities in every, corner of the United States. Again, I've said this before, this is why Bernie Sanders is a special candidate. A good Democratic candidate from, elections past would have one or two of these things. And we'd be like, oh, that's really special. But Bernie is literally trying to run the whole gambit here. And I commend him for it because it's what's needed. It's what's needed right now to build a better society and to build a better world.